You're tuned in to Positively Terrible. I'm producer Dan, and each week my buddy Scott and I discuss surviving and thriving after trauma. It's a journey that started when Scott, his wife's fiance, and her boyfriend walked into a bar. This week's decent human being is Christine. She's got a fucked up story about the stigma of growing up with a facial difference. Settle in, my terrible listeners. Today's episode is going to be positively terrible.
I was nervous and stressed because I thought you were the best. I was right.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, Dan. How you doing today?
Man, I'm pretty good today. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I mean, it's awfully early here. I'm just woke up to do this, and I've said it before, though, this is one of my favorite things to wake up to do. I can always take a nap afterwards. It's my Sunday. I would like to be sleeping in a little bit, but I'm very happy to get up to do something like this. And I don't know. I was going to say, and I don't know what I'm doing with the rest of my day. Probably watching the Bears lose. What's up with you today, Dan?
Instead of watching the Bears lose, which is usually my plan on a Sunday, I am going with my daughter and my wife to the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. So if they want to be a sponsor of the show, here I am. I'm welcome and I'm for sale.
You are for sale. Thanks, Dan. Well, have a good time today. And today we have got Christine with us. Christine, have you ever been to the Ringling Brothers Circus?
I have many, many years ago when I was a little girl, I went to the circus.
All right.
Yes.
I do not remember ever going to the circus. I do remember going to Disney on Ice once, I think it was. It might have been, was it Disney or Smurfs? You know what? That's not what we're here to talk about today. Christine, thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell us what you're here to talk about?
And thank you so much for having me. So I'm here to talk about, like Dan mentioned, growing up with the stigma of having a facial difference. I was born with a cleft lip and palate, which meant that I had multiple surgeries. I was bullied. It affected my personality, it affected my mental health, workplace discrimination, the whole thing. It affects my whole life, and it's a lifetime journey. So, Scott and I are going to delve into it and talk a little more about it and just educate everyone.
For sure. And that's a perfect lead-in, because I was going to ask you if you could kind of explain to our audience. I think a lot of people have familiarity with it, or at least the term, the cleft lip and cleft palate. But could you explain what that is?
Sure, absolutely. So when the baby is born in the womb, I mean, not to get too scientific, we start out as two halves and we come together as a whole. So when a baby is born with a cleft, the upper lip and the upper palate never form together properly. In my case, it stayed open. And so as a result, when your palate is closed, the food goes down your throat. In my case, because my palate was open, food would come out my nose. I couldn't breathe properly. And because my upper lip was open, it never properly closed. I couldn't eat. I couldn't talk. I couldn't breathe normally. I had no bone in the upper jaw. So it was just, a hot mess. I mean, for lack of a better word. So my first surgery was when I was about 2 months old. And that was just to be able to start to close the upper lip so I could nurse. I couldn't even nurse. I mean, food, there was no way food would go down my throat, would come out my nose. There was risk of choking. My mother was always afraid that I would just, choke to death because the food would go down into my lungs. Okay. So it was a really big problem. And a lot of babies do suffer malnutrition and have the risk of, dying because they can't nurse properly. So after that, there were many more surgeries to repair the lip, to close the palate so I could breathe normally, eat normally, and then the dental work to help with the teeth, and just, it's never ending. But I'll let you ask me some more questions.
Sure, thank you. That sounds, I can't imagine, especially from like your parents' point of view. And I have never, until we first spoke, I had never really considered like a cleft lip, cleft palate. I didn't really know what it was to that extent. And
yeah, I didn't know that had such medical significance. To my brain, it was the only people I knew that uh, had a cleft palate. They had a small scar on their lip and they were adults. I didn't realize the medical significance and the danger that a child was in
Oh,
born with
yes.
that condition.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was going to say. So, if you couldn't nurse when you were born, how did you? What was that like? How were you fed? And I mean, was it tubes? Was it And did you have to stay in the hospital?
Well, I mean, my mother was taught by the doctors how to feed me. It was either literally a teaspoon with formula because I couldn't obviously naturally breastfeed. So it was either a teaspoon with formula that she would have to just put in my mouth and try to get down my throat. Sometimes it's an eyedropper or a syringe until I had the surgery to at least close the lip and at least, started to kind of give some direction. Nowadays, they have special nipples that parents can put on the bottles to help that basically don't require suction. They're kind of a reverse suction nipple, and nowadays, also, there's so much more medical technology that the babies don't need surgery so young. They use what's called a NAM taping, which is basically where they tape the upper lip close to bring it together. And they do that basically the day that they're born or a couple of days after. So it reduces the need for surgery. It increases the healing process. But yeah, for me, it was just a matter of either a syringe for the formula or a teaspoon and just a lot of patience and a lot of time.
How many kids are in your family and what number are you?
Mhm. I have a younger sister, so I'm the older one. My sister is 4 years younger than me, and she does not have a cleft lip and palate.
I can imagine firstborn kid to a family. That's got to be a very scary way to start.
It was very difficult. My father often told me how when, I was born, he was in a complete panic and he didn't know what to do. And, he's of the generation, he was born in the 30s, so he's of the generation where everything was perfect and babies weren't born with, birth defects. And so he was in a complete panic. My mother was always the stoic one and I guess, the rock of the family. And her attitude was, well, she's healthy, she's breathing, she's crying, she's healthy. She asked the doctors, can this be fixed? And that term, can this be fixed, was both a blessing and a curse to me. It became kind of like something that I hated, but also it was my mother's way of coping and advocating for me. So she always had the attitude, okay, this can be fixed. We can work with it. She's a healthy baby. Let's go forward. But my father was still in a complete panic, and just it was their nature. So yeah, it was very scary for them. And of course, having my sister, I think, 4 years later, there was always that concern: was this going to happen again?
Yeah, and I just kind of want to say that I think part of the importance of someone like you talking about this and telling your story is about the language that you use. Because you said, like, being fixed is a blessing and a curse. I can only imagine that when you're being told something needs to be fixed, that especially as a child, the message you're hearing is, I am broken. There's something wrong with me. Is that right?
Absolutely. And that was how I felt very early. From the first time I was aware that I was different and that I didn't look like the other children. And I knew, I was going to doctors every week, every month. I mean, by the time I was 6 years old, I already had 3 or 4 surgeries.
Wow.
So I had 20 surgeries throughout my life, the majority between 2 months and maybe when I was 13. So I always felt broken. I always felt that I was defective. And the doctors always says, "Oh, we're gonna fix you. We're gonna make you look like a model. We're gonna make you look beautiful." The reality is, I didn't want to look like a model. I just wanted to be normal. I just wanted to, not get bullied and hit down in school and be called a monster. And I didn't care about looking beautiful. I just wanted to be, myself and have a normal life. So, yeah, the term being fixed was very, very negative for me because it made me feel, and it really compounded that I was broken and even more defective than I already felt. It took a lot of work to get over that stigma of my, that self stigma of myself.
Yeah. Is there a better way to talk about it? Do you have that language? Is there a preferred language?
I don't, well, nowadays, I don't see it as a baby born with a cleft lip needs to be fixed. Even, in the circles, the groups that I'm in, sometimes we say it's repaired. And the repaired is a little bit easier, but even repaired indicates that, there's something wrong, and repair we see is fixed. I just want to say that it just needs to be, operated on, or it needs to be closed to close the gap so that they can be functional. And I just
Yeah.
use medical terms, just operated on, because when you say operated on, it doesn't sound as negative. It doesn't sound like, okay,
Sure.
it needs to be repaired, fixed.
Yeah, that makes
Sure.
sense.
Hmm.
And you mentioned a moment ago, like from the time you realized that you were, and I'll use your word, quote unquote, different.
Hmm.
When was that? And what feelings did that kind of bring up for you?
It was probably when I was really in kindergarten, which was about maybe 5, 6 years old. The kids would start to bully me. I remember I went to a Catholic school at first because my family's Catholic, and I had to go to speech therapy. And that affected how much I was in school. I had to get out of school early. And that's when I knew I was different. Being pulled out of school early in the day to go to speech therapy. Why, I knew I had to go to speech therapy, but why I couldn't stay in, why I had to go to it. It was just too much for my 6 year old brain to handle. And
Sure.
that's when I first realized I was different, combined with going to all the doctors. And my mother always said, well, you were just born this way. And that was a term that I took on when kids would make fun of me or say, hey, what happened to your lip? I would kind of put my hands on my hips and very defiantly say, I was born this way. As, say, you're not going to ask me anything more about it. And
Sure.
that was also my defense mechanism. But deep inside, that shame started to grow, and it grew until literally I was in my late 40s. And, it was just a whole lifetime of shame.
Wow. That is a very tough experience. Tough is not the word. There's a lot stronger words that probably better reflect what I'm trying to say, but I it just I can't imagine. I say that so much on this show. Um, and I can appreciate that's the way I was born. But even as you're saying it, as you're hearing more and more that you're different, I'm sure that message starts to lose meaning to even you, right?
It does, because then at some point you just drown it out and you just, become in denial and you just realize, like, okay, I mean, for me, being told I was different, knowing that I needed all these surgeries, eventually I reached the point, I think it was somewhere around my teenage years, where I just pretended I was normal. My mother, when I would come home with the stories about being bullied, my mother used to say, well, let it roll off your back, ignore them, it's not true. And eventually I learned the best way to cope was to pretend I was normal, refuse to talk about my cleft, refuse to say anything about it, not listening to the bullies, ignore them completely, and just pretend I was normal. There was nothing wrong with me. Yeah, I had to go to doctors, just go do it and shut that part out. And what I later learned, and I like to tell everybody who asks, and even people I work with, is that denial is not a river in Egypt. And at some point in my life, all of that denial came back, and it, really just hit hard like a tidal wave. So I don't recommend living in a state of denial.
Yeah. Did you have anyone to talk to at that when you were a child? Did you have a therapist, or did you know of anyone else with a cleft lip and palate?
Unfortunately, I did not. I mean, I may have seen one or two other children with a cleft when I would have to go to, like, maybe not even the hospital at times. I went to the state medical board to try to get approved for state funding. It wasn't even Medicare. It was, maybe like state funding. They would just go and see what the regular dentists or doctors were doing. Once in a while, I would see another child maybe with a cleft at different stages of their surgeries. We wouldn't talk to each other. We barely made eye contact. There was that, shame so thick you can feel it.
Mhm.
Um, I couldn't talk to my mother. I didn't feel comfortable enough. I never talked to her about my feelings or about the club beyond what was medically necessary. It's just, hey, you're having another surgery. You're going to the doctor. That was it. It was a very contentious subject for my family growing up because there was a lot of financial strain involved in it. So no, I didn't have any mental health. I didn't have any therapists or anybody to talk to. I didn't have any friends that knew what I was going through. And despite the recommendations from my doctors, based on reports that I've seen that my mother get mental health help for me at my young age, they didn't believe it. My parents never believed in mental health. They didn't see the value in it. So I didn't get any help until I was really in my probably early 20s is the first time I got mental health help. And even then it wasn't specifically for this is I was still in that denial stage.
Sure, I can understand that. Um, what was you've mentioned bullying a little bit.
Mhm.
What was that like? And I guess my question here is to start with: are we talking primarily verbal? Did it escalate into any physical bullying too?
It was mostly verbal, but there were two occasions that I still remember as if it happened yesterday, even though it happened probably 40, at least 40, 45 years ago. Two occasions that were physical. The physical part was, in the playground. I was just standing on the side of the playground, waiting for my mother to pick me up after school. Didn't really have any friends.
Mhm.
Didn't really play with anybody. And a couple of boys came over and they just looked at me and they said, "You're so ugly. You shouldn't be living." And they tried to push me down some stairs. And fortunately, I grabbed onto the fence that I was standing near, and they didn't see them pushing me down the stairs. They just see them knocking me over. I ripped pair of tights that I was wearing, scraped up my knee pretty badly. And, I was always very protective of my face. If I was ever going to fall down, I knew to kind of fall in such a way that it was not on my face and not where I would damage anything. Which ironically throughout my later life never really happened. But as a kid, I knew to protect that. So that was the first situation. The second time it did get physical was when I was probably 13. I actually got into a fight with another girl in the lunchroom. She claimed I was sitting in her seat, and at that point, I think I was in my angry stage, which is ironic because I don't consider myself an angry person. But interestingly, through all of the therapy work, one of the first things my therapist said is, "I have a lot of anger," and I defiantly and angrily said, "No, I don't." And I'm still working through that anger.
And you
You
hate
know,
that therapist to this
Right.
day.
I'm not
I
angry,
do,
you're
but
angry.
I do, but I'm still also working with them. And how can you have the life that I did and not be angry? With everything going on, and so with the girl in the lunchroom, it actually turned into a fist fight a little bit until the teachers came and woke us up. And I think I may have actually gotten a little bit of a bloody nose and a big yelling at from my mother about protecting my nose. But a
Right.
lot of the bullying was actually verbal. I've been called names like Quasimodo. When I went to school once with bandages on my lip, the kids called me Hitler. I was asked if I was, kicked in the face by a horse. My mother got kicked in the stomach when she was pregnant. The worst part that I can remember is in the schoolyard. I overheard two parents talking when I was waiting to be picked up. My mother picked me up. Parents, saw me and they says, "Well, I'm glad she wasn't my daughter. I would have left her at the hospital." And all I can remember thinking at that moment was, I'm glad I'm not your daughter either. So it
I
was
was a
just,
I was about to say kids are so mean, but I guess adults are as well. And
they
I
are.
actually have an experience that I'm not going to share. It's not has any doesn't have anything to do with me, but of hearing the way an adult talk about a child when I was 12 years old, just completely blowing my mind that an adult could have bad things to say about a kid,
Hmm.
especially when it wasn't because the kid was a shithead or anything. It was
Right.
actually regarding the kid's sexuality. He was about 12 years old and very effeminate, and I'm not going to get into that. But you've mentioned a couple times protecting your face.
Yes.
So I do have a follow up there. Are is the area your lip palate nose area, is it, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say fragile. I don't know the right word,
Is it
but
is it more susceptible to injury
there we go.
than uh
It's not that it's more susceptible any more than maybe yours is, but the issue is that if you break your nose, it's probably easier, if you're tolerant enough of the pain to just kind of put your nose back in place and everything's okay. If you fall down and knock out a tooth, you go to the dentist and either they can just put a crown on it or maybe, an implant and everything is okay. For me, if I break my nose because of the reconstructive surgery I had, it's not as easy to repair or to put back in place. And if I knock out a tooth, well, all of my upper teeth are all implants and they're not individual posts of the implants. It's a complex bridge work with, the back molars being into my natural bone. I have no bone in the front, so they had to do kind of a hybrid bridge work that were implants with posts that were in all different places. So if I were to fall down and knock out my upper teeth, it would be a disaster. That would require probably a whole team of dentists again to repair and replace. And I know I've been using that term repair, and it just sometimes still comes naturally to me, and to fit. So that's why I've always been very protective of my face.
That makes perfect sense.
Understandable. And even if it wasn't like that, nobody wants to go through. I mean, you've been through 20 plus surgeries, you've said at this point. How many of those came during childhood?
Oh, that's a great question. So I had probably about 15 of those surgeries during childhood. Most of them, like I said, my first surgery was when I was about 2 months old. 6 and 7 months old is when I had the majority of them. Then it was a little bit of a break while everything healed, some dental work. 12 and 13, I had another one. It was to remove, some extra scar tissue. That was right before I went into high school. And then again, a long break. And then I had, when I was in my 20s, right before I aged out of my parents' insurance, I had another surgery. And that was it until about my early 30s. And I had two bone grafts, which were needed because I had no natural bone in my upper teeth. So I had another one when I was in my early 30s. That was my second bone graft I needed for my implants. And that was the last surgery I've had. Like I said, a combination of surgeries for closing the palate, the lip, reconstructing the nose, removing scar tissue, making the upper lip a little more pliable to be able to, have the flexibility in there. I also had surgery for tubes in the ears, tubes out of the ears. You name it, I think I've been through it.
So the bullying occurred in your childhood and through high school, it sounds like, but did it continue after high school?
Absolutely. It was all through college. But, as you age and as, society, I mean, you get older, the bullying changes. It was not the name calling that I experienced in elementary school and, junior high school, seventh, eighth grade. In high school, it was a little bit more sinister. I went to an all girls Catholic high school, and you would think that going to an all girls, especially at Catholic high school, there would be a level of acceptance. But I'll tell you, girls can be extremely petty and nasty, and for lack of a better word, really, really bitchy. And that's when it really was difficult because, you're high schooling, you're figuring out who you are, your teenage years, and then, you want to be in the social circles, you want to be among the popular girls. And it was just really catty. I had one close friend, and that was it. But the bullying continued. It was more of, instead of the name calling, it was the silent treatment. It was eliminating me. It was looking at me funny, or it was the snarkiness, asking me if I had a boyfriend yet. When it was clear that I didn't. I had trouble dating. I mean, I had trouble. I had self-esteem, self-worth issues. There was no way I was even going to consider myself good enough to be dating anybody. And boys weren't even going to look at me, and they didn't because boys didn't want to be seen with me. So it continued there, and even after high school, in college. It wasn't too bad in college, but it was also prevalent in the workplace. I faced a lot of workplace discrimination. I got started working in business, and company says we can't hire you. We're worried about what the clients will think. We're worried about how you'll sound over the phone. We're worried about just can you handle the job? Are you going to need more surgeries? All of these issues that I reassured them would not be a problem. I faced workplace discrimination, and even as recent as a couple of months ago, there was an issue where I can't go into too much detail because it's still, it's in the process, but I'm an accounting professor, I'm a college professor, and I had an issue where there was still some workplace discrimination with my speech and my, how I talk and being able to be understood. So it is something that, society needs to be aware of and continue to change and become accepting. And I think that's only going to happen with more education and awareness.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, you do speaking engagements. I will say that there have been times when I haven't understood what you've said today. That has been 100% because of the internet. There are, it's getting a little choppy right now, but I mean, it seems like, and I don't know, I guess I'll ask you, do you feel like it is malicious, or do you think it's just not knowing, not understanding, and being different?
Um, when I was younger, and until I worked on myself and realized what I realize now, I always thought it was personal. I always thought it was malicious, and I always thought it was because I was a monster. I was the bad person. I was, the evil person. That was the story I told myself. Now, having a different level of understanding, I know that the bullying and the name calling and the stigma is because of fear. We fear what we don't understand, and we fear
Hmm.
that which is different. And so, to help deflect that fear, to help comfort us, we turn to whatever we can think of. If somebody calls someone a negative name and bullies them, it makes them feel empowered, and not necessarily in a good
Sure.
way. And it's not the right way to do it, but it gives them some level of power that gives them comfort and reduces that fear. And I think it just originates from, not knowing, from ignorance, and from not, awareness. They don't, maybe somebody hasn't seen somebody with a cleft lip like me. They don't know what it's about. They have a lot of fear. And I think it's also a lot of discomfort. I was very afraid. I mean, for the longest time, I could not see my own baby picture because it was so disturbing to me, and it was so uncomfortable, and in some ways, I mean, I hate to say this, it was disgusting to me. I didn't want to acknowledge that was me, and it made me feel uncomfortable, and I understood, if I feel that way, how would other people feel? And so, taking that perspective and saying, okay, this is why they do that, I can understand it, but that's not an excuse for their behavior and their actions. And that's where,
Sure.
again, the education and the awareness comes in.
Yeah, and I failed to say it earlier, and I meant to, but when you said that you were angry, a lot of us, most of us even, aren't really taught how to deal with emotions or recognize what we're feeling. And they can manifest in anger if you don't allow yourself to feel and process. But I think it's kind of the same on the other side, right? Is that kids are awkward, and I'm saying kids, I know this has gone into adulthood, but growing up, a lot of your classmates probably didn't know why they were doing it either. It was just a way to fulfill something that they were feeling, which it might be this is different, this is unusual, or their own self identity. It's easier to make fun of someone else to make yourself feel better. So in a lot of ways, a lot of this is natural, I think, and I'm sure that doesn't make it feel any better for you, though.
It is
So,
natural. And
what?
again, mhm.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just saying it is natural, and again, with a lot of more than 10 years of therapy, I've learned to take a different perspective on it. I think the children were doing a combination of peer pressure. One kid in school might have done it, and then all the others jump on the bandwagon. I think also, again, it's their own, like you said, their own emotions, not knowing how to process that someone looks different from them, not knowing at home that how to deal with it, maybe even examples from their parents. So for me, there was a lot of anger. I was never able to
Mhm.
process those emotions. I never learned how to handle the emotions that I had. And I think, again, helping children realize that, hey, we're all different and that's okay. And that level of acceptance is going to go a long way no matter what the children face, no matter what the issue is.
Sure. And do you think it's changing today? I mean, or well, I guess let me back up. Let me back up just a second. And you are involved in kind of a community, correct? You do speaking engagements and things like that. So, are you meeting with other people at this point of your life that have cleft lips and palates?
Hmm. Absolutely, yes. So I volunteer with Smile Train, which is a global organization that their main mission is to train medical professionals in other countries
Okay.
to perform the surgeries for people with cleft lip and palate in those countries. But also, as part of Smile Train's mission, is that they're also working to strengthen and improve the cleft community in the United States. So I work with them and a committee of other adults with a cleft lip and palate and parents of children with a cleft to help improve the communication and strengthen the community. And talk about perfect timing. Smile Train has had their fourth annual Cleft Con, which is their annual conference, yesterday and Friday night. There's a virtual this weekend where about 150 people, we all get together online. It's an afternoon filled with sessions, workshops, talking about insurance issues, care for an adult with cleft, resiliency, different issues that we have living with cleft, and even for parents of a child with a cleft. So I'm a very integral part of the community in Facebook and with Smile Train, and I'm also a confidence coach. I work with adults who have cleft lip and palate to help them improve their confidence, improve their self-esteem, improve their self-worth. And in addition to adults with cleft, I work with anyone that has a facial difference or issues with accepting their appearance.
I love that. That's awesome, and uh, it's amazing the things we learn. CleftCon, I would not have expected an organization or an event like that, but that sounds incredible. And I'm sure that the internet now has made things less hard. I'm not going to say easier, but when you can find your community somewhere and find information, I can only imagine that that makes it easier. I said easier this time, less hard for kids dealing with something like this. It probably makes people feel like they're not as alone as you might have felt, not knowing any other kids with the same difference that you had. Would you say that the kids are able to find more resources these days? Is it a different world for them?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned the internet because it was two things or one thing really that helped me break out of my state of denial and begin my self-acceptance. I didn't really accept my cleft until my late 40s. I denied it. I If you would have told me maybe 10 years ago that I would have been sitting here having a podcast that was going to go out on the internet talking to you about my club, I would have said never in a million years. I also would have said never in a million years would I have given a TED talk talking about my cleft lip and palate and having that talk
Sure.
start with my baby picture. I mean, I always wanted to give a TED talk, but not about myself. And so
For sure.
the big catalyst was it was the death of my mother. She passed in 2017. And when she
So
died,
sorry.
I was so alone and I was so lost. I didn't know what to do. She was the only person who knew what I truly went through. And so in that moment of loneliness, I turned to the internet and I just Googled cleft lip and palate. On Facebook, I Googled cleft lip. It was curiosity. What's out there? Is there any more information? Anybody wrote any books about it? There was never any books at the time. And I found a Facebook group of only adults with a cleft lip and palate. And I joined the group, and that was the moment that everything started to change for me. In that group at that
Wow.
time, it was maybe a little over 500 members. I was able to, other people that were going through what I went through, we talked about our challenges, we understood each other. And then from there, I was realizing, okay, I'm not defective, I'm not broken, I'm not the monster I thought I was.
Mhm.
And that helped me open up. And then from there, I got involved in Smile Train, and it was just kind of a progression, little by little, that I came to where I am today and continued the healing process.
That's amazing. And Christine, I'm going to apologize to you because we've talked a lot about children or your childhood, and the way I framed that question a moment ago is it easier for children growing up? But clearly, I didn't realize. I knew your journey really took off in adulthood, but I did not realize it was so recently. So it sounds like even as an adult that the resources are a lot different today, and there's a lot of healing that probably has to be done for many adults as well. So I'm so happy you found that, and I got goosebumps when you said that you found a page with people over 500 members that only had or that all had the same experience or the same difference that you have, because that's an incredible thing, finding your people. I'm big on finding community, and that's an amazing thing. So can you tell us a little bit about your coaching then? Is that more for adults, or I mean, sorry, adults with cleft lips and palates, or is it for parents, or is it a little bit of both?
Absolutely. So I work with all clients who want to improve their confidence, their self-esteem, their
Oh, okay.
self-worth. They don't necessarily have to have a facial difference. If they just
Okay.
feel, they're struggling with accepting themselves, I work with them. I mean, it could just be maybe they don't like the color of their hair, or they don't like that they have freckles, or they have, I mean, anything it could be. I work with them to help them build that level of acceptance and say, hey, it's okay to look different and feel, different, and to how to build that acceptance and that confidence that even though you look different, you're still welcome in the world and you still have a lot to offer. I work mostly with adults who have a cleft, and I've also helped parents overcome the shame that they feel around their children who have a cleft or
Mhm.
who have, a facial difference. Because again, for parents, it's also so hard. They have this child, and all parents are proud of their babies, and then to have a baby that, has this facial difference and have to explain it or have to field the questions, and, being involved in the community and having several parents who are great friends. I understand their pain. I've heard their pain. I've seen what they go through. And then for parents to see their child go into the surgery, and, even though I don't have any children of my own, I can understand what they must feel when they have to see their child hurting through surgery, hearing their stories when their child comes out after surgery and, is crying because of the pain or, the recovery, and then having to go through it again. And then as for the adults,
Yeah.
I work with them to help them build that confidence. Growing up like I did, the major issue that I think we all have when we have that facial difference is the fear of rejection and the fear of not fitting in. It's something that we struggle with. So I help to build, how to not take everything personally, how to, feel that we have that confidence to go out there, be assertive, advocate for what we want, and realize that we have a lot to offer.
And you certainly do, Christine. I'm speaking to you specifically. I think all humans have a lot to offer, but hearing what you're saying, it sounds like you have an incredible wealth of knowledge and life experience that is very, very helpful for others. But I can't help but notice, and I hope I heard you correctly. And actually, I hope I didn't hear you correctly. But did you say that parents feel shame of having children with this difference?
Mhm. Absolutely. Unfortunately, they do. I mean, I know my mother never talked about her feelings of when she had me and that I had the cleft lip and palate. But like I said, I talked to a lot of parents of children with a cleft. I spent time. I had the pleasure of going to Kenya through Smile Train, where I spent a week there with other adults with a cleft and a mother of a child with a cleft, and just getting to know them personally, one on one. My work with Smile Train, knowing the parents, the comments that I hear from parents repeatedly is they feel guilty that they somehow caused the problem, the cleft in their child. They feel guilty that it was their fault, and then they feel the shame. They show pictures of their baby, and instead of people saying, "Oh, what a cute baby," the first comment is, "What's wrong with their face?" Or it might be a comment, "Well, they can fix that." And that's not something that anybody wants to hear, let alone a parent of a baby. And there was an incident that happened earlier this year. It was about May or June. A mother she posted a baby picture of her son when he was a couple of days old, before he had
Hmm.
his surgeries to close his cleft lip. And she commented on how beautiful he was. She loved his eyes and his chubby cheeks, and she posted it on Facebook. And Facebook pulled the picture and cited that it was offensive. And they, pulled it. She was at work when she got the message that they pulled the picture and it was offensive. She reposted it again a couple of hours later and said, "Well, I'm going to try posting this again and see what happens." And it stayed up, and it made the rounds to our community. And I actually wrote a blog post about it and why Facebook pulled the picture. I mean, after talking to her, and her son is now 5 years old, and so the picture was kind of like one of those flashbacks. But her son is 5 years old, and she said it's still to this day, 5 years later, hurt her that Facebook or somebody reported the picture as offensive. He was an adorable little baby picture. And yeah, he had a cleft lip, but that doesn't make him an offensive baby picture. And it just shows the ignorance around it. And it, like she said, it brought back all the shame she felt the day he was born. And it was just really difficult. And so that's a lot of things that parents go through, again, is that acceptance, that shame, and the fear of, is their baby going to be okay? The surgeries, not knowing what they're going to have to go through until they get educated about the cleft lip and palate and all the, surgeries and the medical issues around it.
And even with that knowledge, you had surgeries up until your 20s. It's not. I'm sorry. I don't know when they ended. You may have mentioned. I did not take a note, but into adulthood is what I meant. It's not like it's a surgery or two surgeries and it's over. But Christine, what would you tell your 12-year-old self if you could talk to her today?
That's a great question. There's so much I would probably tell her. I would tell her that it's all going to be okay. That's the biggest thing that I was always so worried about was, is it is it going to be okay? Am I going to make it through? Am I going to survive? What am I going to, I mean, am I going to be accepted in society? Am I going to be accepted in the world? So I would tell her to just keep pushing forward, keep being herself. Don't let the, bitterness and the anger take over. And it never did. It's just not who I am. And just that it would be okay, that there was always hope. Because again, looking back now, to where I am now and where I was and how I felt growing up. I never would have thought that my life would have taken the turn that it did. And it was by no means easy. There was a lot of suffering involved along the way. But what I learned is that all of the experiences I had made me who I am today. They gave me the experience that I can share with others, and they gave me the resiliency that I have, the determination, and the knowledge that I can help others and inspire others.
All right. Well, you know what I'd tell 12-year-old Christine? I would tell her that I just interviewed adult Christine on video with audio. I wouldn't say for a podcast because she wouldn't know what that is yet. Um, but I would say that we just talked on video over audio, and I think I wouldn't have to say any more for her to realize just how far that you've come. It's been incredible today, Christine. I'm so happy you've come on with us. If someone wanted to get in touch with you or get your coaching services, where would they find you?
Absolutely. So they can find me on the web. My website is ChristineErrico.com. I'm also on Facebook. So my page is Coach Christine Errico or ChristineErrico.com. I also have my own Facebook group. Just Google or go on Facebook, look for the Facebook group, Cleft Lip and Palate Community for Adults. It's for parents of children with a cleft. It's for adults with a cleft. It's for medical providers. It's more of a general support group. The adult support group is, called Affected Adults, and then there's always Smile Train. So if you just Google me, you'll come up. You'll also find my TED Talk that's on my website, where I talk a little bit more about my uh, journey growing up, my trip to Kenya, where I got to meet some other children and teenagers with a cleft. And so, yeah.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to put all of that up on our site and in the show notes. Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
stumbling
those will
through my
be
words.
in the show notes associated with your picture there, right in the show notes, Christine.
For sure.
Okay,
So
great.
we will make sure our listeners know how to find that. And I guess this has been great, Christine. I'm so happy you came on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, for sure. And thank you so much again. You've been an amazing guest. And as always, I have to say it. You've passed the decent fucking human test. You're doing great work out there, not just for you, but for a lot of other people. We're grateful, we're honored and humbled, and all of those fun words by your willingness to come on and share your story, not with just Dan and I, but also with our terrible listeners. And to terrible listeners, I always forget to say this, but I'm going to today. Remember to like us on our socials. We're at Positively Terrible. Remember, I'm still paying for decent fucking human tattoos. So if you
Nobody's
want,
going to get one.
oh, I've already got that. But you know what? I'm just going to send you pictures very soon, Dan. But yeah, so follow us, like us, share all of our stuff. It's incredibly helpful when you do. And as always, today has been absolutely, positively terrible.
I met you back at Tonic Fest. I confess I was nervous and stressed because I thought you were the best. I was right, and that night we got into a water gun fight that I won. I shot you in the face. It was fate. I offered you a spring. You declined. I said, keep it. You might decide to change your mind. You did. Yeah, you did. Now I'm glad. I got you in my life, it's alright. If you don't wanna spring, I'm just glad to have your company. Then we got Rhino after that. Rhino was the fattest cat. Now we got Alan. I am so lucky I found you. And then you know you're like the boss. Oh, I am never at a loss to find the words that I should say. Because I love you to this day. It was fate. I offered you a spring. You declined. I said, keep it. You might decide to just change your mind. You did. Yeah, you did. Now I'm glad. I got you in my life, it's alright. If you don't wanna spring, I'm just glad to have your company. Met you back at Tonica Fest. I confess I was nervous and stressed because I thought you were the best. I was right.
Positively Terrible is a part of the Terrible Podcast Network.